Alright, so can we have the next presentation set up, please? Meanwhile, I would like to call upon Valerina, the co-founder at Speculative Rationality, who also happened to be the brand sponsor for this event. And she is going to cover a very interesting topic, the nth degree of blockchain, reshaping the way you identify opportunities. So can we have the caller mic set up, please?
Can everyone hear? Hi everyone, it's really great to be out here in Bangalore speaking to you guys about blockchain. So today we've had some really good conversations on what I really think are the fundamental building blocks of the blockchain ecosystem. So these are the topics that I would usually be speaking to you about. But today I'd like to bring something that's a little bit different and a little bit new to the table. So what I'd really like to talk to you about today is how do we identify and make the most of the multitude of opportunities that a disruptive technology such as blockchain introduces to the world. Now when I say opportunities, what immediately comes to mind? Who has access to the best opportunities? Now across time and across industries, one group comes to mind, and those are the leaders. So what separates the leaders of tomorrow who take a technology such as blockchain and lead that transformation for society from the masses who at best are perhaps able to observe such a transformation? And I think it fundamentally boils down to one quality or skill set. And it's really that ability to envision the future. So the leaders in our industry and other industries are not thinking, what can we achieve today? Or what is today's landscape of that? They're trying to think, what can we achieve 10 years from now? Where might this technology be half a century or 1 century from now? It's really their ability to envision the future that leads the rest of us towards it. So what I like to describe as this ability to envision the extreme potential of an outcome is imagining the nth degree of absurdity. So what is the nth degree of absurdity when we're thinking about blockchain? What does blockchain do for the world? Blockchain essentially introduces the ability for us to function in a trustless peer-to-peer ecosystem. So when we think about the nth degree of absurdity, we have to think about what is the potential for how that can change human collaboration and the way businesses function. So when we're talking about opportunities and thinking about the nth degree of absurdity, what we have to consider is what is our current understanding? Where are we in terms of our own knowledge and our understanding of what are the gaps in our learning that we need to make to be the leaders who imagine that nth degree of absurdity? So for this reason, I'd like to point your attention towards the slide on my left. You'll see there are 4 tiers. I like to think of the understanding of the blockchain landscape as able to be broken down into these 4 tiers. Now, if you look at the tier 4, it's layman understanding. These are the people who perhaps have heard of blockchain, but are only beginning to explore it. Tier 3, moderate understanding. These are the people who understand, yes, blockchain is a disruptive technology, but they're not really sure about the full implications for the future. I think most of you will associate with tier 2. So you're experts or you're quite knowledgeable in certain aspects of blockchain, but you're still endeavoring to really comprehend the full breadth and depth of its implications. Where I really want to focus your attention is that tier 1. Tier 1 is the top percentile of intelligence in this industry. And what that top percentile has in common with leaders is the ability to imagine the nth degree of absurdity. It's this ability that allows them to align themselves not just with industry leaders and innovators, but the cutting edge and bleeding edge technology that pushes the boundaries beyond what we can achieve today. So what I want to do today is impart with you a model that has been very integral to the success of our organization. And what I'm hoping it can do for you is accelerate your progress from whichever tier that you find yourself in right now to that top percentile. And you may be wondering, what is the advantage of reaching that tier 1? And I say that the most striking thing to me is access. Access to the best opportunities that often remain exclusive to this top percentile. Now, in locomoting towards tier 1, which really has been a core motivator for our organization the past few years, one challenge that I find many of us will face as individuals is really a difficulty or lack of ability to process a brand new idea or a brand new concept and contextualize it in a meaningful way so that we can extract from it all of the value and opportunities that it presents. So for this reason, today I'll begin my talk by talking about the mental inhibitors that we face in identifying opportunities and the tools we can use to overcome these barriers. I'll contextualize this for you with a familiar story. This story really centers on how imagining the nth degree of absurdity and using these tools has manifested into real-world success. And finally, I will introduce to you a new idea. The reason I'll introduce something that's a little bit unfamiliar is to see how we fare with implementing this model and see how we cope when something new comes into our cognitive landscape. So what happens? What happens when we come across brand new information? Our brain synapses are immediately processing and contextualizing that information in our current worldview. So this is what we already know. The reason we do this is to take one of two paths. We either want to dismiss the idea in front of us, or we want to be intrigued by it. When we dismiss an idea, it's often because of our hypocognition. So what do I mean by hypocognition? It's when we lack the framework or understanding to truly contextualize something meaningfully. And this could be for a number of reasons. It could be an arrogance of knowledge, also known as a crisis of knowledge. It could be because of laziness, or it could be because we wrongly assume that we don't have the aptitude to truly understand it. On the other hand, and I'm sure this has happened to many of us in this room, something exciting comes along and we rush to accept it. When we rush to accept it, we try to overlay our preconceived knowledge on top of it. And by doing so, we often fit a square within a circle. And we leave out large chunks of the innovation that this new idea presents. Or it could be that we're so excited about it, we haven't looked deep enough into it. So hypo and hypercognition are at the root of a lot of missed opportunities. What can we do to become the people that identify opportunities ahead of everyone else? So I'd like to talk about a very interesting psychological study called Johari's window. Now, intelligence agencies across the world for decades now have extrapolated the principles of Johari's window to train and teach their professionals how to avoid the pitfalls I've just described to you. So if you look over on the slide, you'll see a cycle. The cycle is moving from unknown unknowns to known unknowns to known knowns. Unknown unknowns are at the stage where we don't even know what we're not aware of. So how do we get to that next stage? We have to distill the gaps in our knowledge. What are the vectors that we haven't even begun looking at? What are the leaps we need to make in order to identify opportunities? Once we get to the stage of a known unknown, what we need to do is imagine the nth degree of absurdity. What is the extreme potential of what lies before us? And when we're able to do that, we're able to extrapolate the patterns, the information, and the research that we can deploy to get to the stage of a known known. So this is the point at which you can say, I understand blockchain, I understand its potential, and I understand the opportunities that it presents. But the cycle doesn't end here. Once you've done this, you'll notice that a plethora of new unknown unknowns will emerge. It's the people who are able to go through several iterations of this cycle who identify opportunities 5, 10, or 15 years ahead of the rest of the world. So this model of imagining the nth degree of absurdity and moving through that cycle is not only about overcoming our hypo and hypercognition. There's a second element which is equally as important. Once we're able to imagine the nth degree of absurdity, what it provides for us is a platform to evaluate the solution in front of us in terms of its relevance. So what do I mean by relevance? I'm referring to form over time. So when we're thinking about blockchain, and we're thinking about the nth degree of absurdity for blockchain, what do you think it is? I think that a lot of us will have multiple images in our head of what it could manifest into 50 years from now. But I think one variation is a decentralized society. So when we're thinking about a decentralized society, we have to imagine that there are certain characteristics which make that reality a possibility. And a solution has to adhere to those core tenets. So when we're talking about decentralization, we're talking about privacy, security, access, trustless environment. It has to be able to adhere to those core tenets over the course of time, even as those characteristics change and evolve. So this has all been a little bit abstract and a lot of brand new concepts. So I want to give you some context to make it a little easier to understand. Let's talk about something very familiar to us, the internet. What was the internet to us before its inception? It was an unknown unknown. It was the ability of a few people to identify that there was a gap in connectivity, that there was a need to connect siloed intranetworks into the internet. And I would say that the founders of the internet themselves would have been hard-pressed to imagine its current nth degree of absurdity which we have reached. So, a familiar success story to many of you is Amazon. Amazon was a byproduct of the internet age. So let's think about Amazon's success for a second. Did Amazon ever envision moving beyond books? Did they imagine the nth degree of absurdity where they would become a central provider of commodities and then move towards it? I imagine what they would have done is identified that yes, we're now in an age of user discovery where it's not relegated to brick and mortar, and seen how lucrative it was to disrupt a commodity such as books. This really comes to inform how Amazon maintains its form over time. It's able to replicate this model in a manner that stays relevant to an ever-evolving digital age. And that's really what equates to the success and the nth degree that Amazon has reached today as a central supplier of all commodities. So as the internet emerged, many patterns of its potential also emerged. And who are the people who are able to reap the most benefit from this era? It was those who are able to overcome their hypo and hypercognition and identify that even within unfamiliar territory, there are opportunities and a wealth of them to be found. And they are the people who have heralded the digital age as we know it today. So far I've been talking to you about a familiar context, and we haven't yet come across something unfamiliar. So let me introduce a new idea to you. Let's think about the web for a second. Tim Berners-Lee, the founder of the web, his initial vision for it was that the web was for everyone. But more recently, Tim was actually quoted saying that the web's become an engine of inequity and division, where powerful forces are able to use it for their own agendas. So Tim believes that today we've reached a critical tipping point, where change for the better isn't just possible, it's actually necessary. So what Tim is really alluding to here is the privacy, the trust, and the security in our data, really, that we see on a daily basis in return for that fundamental connectivity which the centralized gatekeepers and the monopolies of the internet provide us. So if I were to propose to you we had to overhaul the internet to resolve for this issue, it seems like a mammoth proposition and impractical. But with the advent of technologies such as blockchain, which introduce an element of trustlessness, we see the threads of an eventual resolution beginning to form. So let's think about the nth degree of absurdity for blockchain as a decentralized society. Can you imagine such blockchain technologies and applications being built on top of the current infrastructure that we have in the internet with all of its current bottlenecks? At best, it would be a middling solution or a band-aid fix. So let me posit to you an alternative solution and really go out there for a second and imagine this with me. What if we were to build an alternative internet? An internet that was not only built upon the principles of decentralization from its very inception, but also had the technological infrastructure to back it up. Perhaps this internet would look something like an incentivized mesh network built on top of blockchain protocols. So now I've introduced a new idea to you. Perhaps you're assessing if you should dismiss this or if you should be intrigued by it. So let me push you a little further. Let's think about the adoption of such an internet in the trajectory of a decentralized society. Immediately when I think of adoption, a few hurdles come to mind. Can we really compete with the access of the current internet, where it's so widely available infrastructurally? Or can we compete with the user experience of the current internet, which has been designed to serve as many people as fast as possible across the globe? When I mention these hurdles to you, you will channel your energy towards dismissing this idea. This is where I'd like to make an important point. Rather than leaning towards dismissing this idea because it seems too far-fetched, what we should be thinking about is what about the absurd eventuality in which the apparently impossible does occur. So let's try to think along the lines of Why might an alternative internet seem practical? When we imagine this decentralized society, we have to think about the characteristics it would be built upon. We're essentially trying to achieve decentralization while maintaining that anyone can participate in a secure, private, and trustless environment. So these are the characteristics we have to bear in mind as we envision a path to this society. So in envisioning these characteristics, it's not such a large leap to imagine that we would want to build it upon an infrastructure that supports these characteristics, such as an alternative internet, an incentivized mesh network, or whatever form it may take. And such an alternative internet would obviously begin as a grassroots movement. It would attract those who are fascinated by it, developers looking for an even playing field, or perhaps those who feel disenfranchised by the current internet. But in order to maintain and sustain network effects, such an alternative internet would not only have to maintain its form over time, but it would have to ensure that the applications and use cases built on top of it also adhere to the core tenets, which make that absurd reality of a decentralized society possible. So let me talk about a familiar application, Facebook. Can you imagine Facebook in its current form existing in a decentralized society? Perhaps not. Applications like Facebook are highly invasive. What they require us to do is seed our data and our identities in return for fundamental connectivity. What might a decentralized abstraction of Facebook look like? Everything on the surface would perhaps be the same, a social media that is aggregated and organized. But behind the surfaces, the way it functioned would be drastically different. Perhaps it would be a peer-to-peer network that could be completely siloed to you and your colleagues or friends. All of your interactions would be managed locally so that you had complete control over what data, how many of your applications, how much of your identity it actually had access to. Here we would see a fundamental shift in the way businesses would have to think, especially killer applications like Facebook, who depend on our data, the personal advertising and monopolies that they form around it. And they would have to shift towards network effect, the revenue models that they could find within this new alternative internet. So, if I posit a question to you, if I offered you Facebook in its current form, and I offered the decentralized abstraction in which you control your identity and your data, which one would you opt for? The answer to me is obvious. I would opt for the decentralized abstraction. But obviously today, where the user experience and the technology is lagging, that choice doesn't seem so obvious. But when that technology catches up and the user experience and the access is equal to our centralized alternatives, that change will be here to stay. So what have we learned today? My intention here today was not to go through one specific abstraction of what blockchain's potential might be in the future, this alternative internet. It was simply to show you how we may develop a framework to think about new ideas, ideas that are as disruptive as blockchain technology, and to not limit their potential by our preconceived knowledge of the current world. And this will be something very important for us as people within the blockchain industry, with each pivot and turn that its developments brings for society. So if we run through a recap of what we describe the model as, step one is when you come across something new. What holds us back is our inability to place this concept that assails us within a paradigm that does it justice. So to that end, I propose you imagine the nth degree of absurdity. Really dare to imagine and go out there and think about what could this look like in the future. Don't limit yourself to what it looks like from your current perspective. And this nth degree of absurdity isn't a fun activity in imagination. What it does is it provides a platform for us to really evaluate solutions. How well does this solution adhere to the characteristics which make that absurd reality in your mind possible? So for a decentralized society, how well do the solutions in front of you fit into that? Do they actually support or undermine the tenets which form blockchain technology's core? And of course, do you remain relevant over time? Along the way, locomoting towards that absurd reality, did you lose sight of the characteristics that support it? Did a more complete solution come along? Here we have to think Netflix versus Blockbuster. So once we're able to do that, we're able to have a new perspective and new ideas that are able to come to us. So in whatever eventuality blockchain takes us to, we have to question, are we best positioned to see where the developments and the wealth distribution will be? Are we thinking ahead of everyone else, or are we simply following? So I'd like to leave you with one last question. Do you think that I applied the model correctly in introducing an unfamiliar concept of an incentivized mesh network of fund blockchain protocols in my current worldview of the internet? Why did I call it an alternative internet? Was that my nth degree of absurdity, or was it my hypercognition? And that's a question I'd like to leave you with to think about. Thank you.
Any questions? We still have 7 minutes. So, if you do have any questions, you can raise your hands. All right, Valerina, that was indeed a pleasure to hear you speak, and thanks for the wonderful presentation.